Arc 6, Chapter 85, Good loser, the greatest knight, to name himself so entailed courage. He indeed took pride in being called so, extolled so by others. However, never had there been even a single instance wherein he had labeled himself as the utmost, finest. He possessed the conceit of having lived days of stockpiling unsparing hard work and diligent devotion to learning. However, in his incompetent and inexperienced destiny, he was naught but surrounded by unending excelling pioneers, comrades commanding respect, and juniors worthy of admiration. Though vexing, he considered that to be bliss. To be acknowledged by someone ought to be reward for strenuous efforts and diligence. Much less, in the endeavor to be acknowledged by everyone, the strenuous efforts and diligence must be such devotion that they are regarded as extraordinary, that everybody is amazed by solely those. Had his self truly worked hard enough to be worthy of that? He certainly did possess the conceit of having lived days of stockpiling unsparing hard work and diligent devotion to learning. However, did he transcend boundaries? Did he polish and refine oneself every day until he had exhausted all of his strength? Inspired by the strenuous efforts of others, did he pledge further hard work to his ideals? He shall answer his own question by himself. Julius Juculius had indeed accomplished that. Transcending boundaries, polishing and refining oneself until he exhausted all of his strength. With inspiration from the strenuous efforts of others, he pledged further hard work to his ideals. Hence, before the existence who stood as the pinnacle of the sword, he held his head high with confidence. Julius, I am the greatest knight, Julius Juculius, the sword of the kingdom that shall slash you down. Read. Grasping the hem of his mantle, Julius bowed, and ahead of him the sword saint stood silently. He closed his other eye, which was not concealed by the eye patch, and did not look at Julius. But silently bracing his bulky, burly arms, he pondered about something. However, his pondering did not last for long. By simply their short fellowship until now, it was clear that he was the one to possess the disposition of being utmost unsuited to ponderation. Thus read, is a bloody hell. With an intense scratch of his head, the sword Saint Reed potently stomped the floor once. Upon that singular blow, the clear floor of the second layer quaked as if fissuring. Though Echidna, who was watching over the confrontation of the two, drew her body back, Julius stood firm, unwavering. Witnessing that, Reed clicked his tongue with a sh. Reed. Appearances, appearances, appearances. Yeah, appearances, I. You really do be speakin' shit like my follower. What an insufferable bastard you're, you, Julius. Though unfortunately I am not acquainted with him, I must offer my sympathies to the man whom you say is your follower. Reed, who the hell said my follower's a dude? Talkin' bastards, round ain't gonna be amusin' in the first place. The follower I'm talkin' bout's a woman. She's got a nice face, but damns her reasonin' annoyin'. Julius. A female? Then, what is the similitude between myself and her which you speak of? Reed. Don't you make me say it gain and gain. As wrinkles appeared on his snout, Reed expressed a ferocious smile akin to a shark. And unfastening the locked fold of his arms and knocking his cheeks with his hands, Reed. Stenchy reasonin' and havin' a good face. Julius. Reed. Hell, so you won't even get irritated. Damn uncute. Well's fine. Snorting his nose in response to Julius' destitute reaction, Reed magnificently crackled the bones of his neck. Afterwards, through his blue eye, he observed Julius not merely Julius, but his environs too. The quivering fleeting lights seemingly encircling Julius, their brilliance had strengthened compared to what it was earlier. Above all, this would be his first time making these girls debut before Reed this way. Julius. My buds, no, my lovely maidens, do you perhaps have anything to object regarding them? Reed. Nothin'. Nice women ain't of any regard to their race. Unfortunately, I ain't interested in women I can't sleep with. You would have grown stronger had you broken your shell, you know. Julius. If you say so, then a path like that certainly may have existed. Something like offering advice to juniors was fickleness unimaginable considering Reed's personality. For him to have done so must be due to Reed's own moodiness and him deeming Julius' desperate form, who naught but clung to sword to be wasteful. If you are going to cling to the sword anyways, then take a stance paying no heed to appearances. That had been the attitude and resolve he sought for Julius, and that too had been a realizable path. However, Julius, I decided to walk this path. Or possibly, instead bearing what is my true self, as you say, may make me stronger. Julius was aware that should he himself not be powerfully conscious of it, he would naturally become that way. A sudden instant, a narrow exchange of blows, should a solitary bit of his rind distinguish between life and death, that the face of the true Julius would come out. However, that spoke of a scenario wherein he would not be powerfully conscious of it. He shall no longer waver. Julius, hereby I declare, I shall think through myself as a knight. Furthermore, instead of the path you tried to guide me to, I shall become myself who excels in all fronts. Read. Huh, the hell kinda reasonin' makes you say you're gonna be doing that, you. Julius, it is obvious. The knight I lay my trust in is the personification of ideals. He is noble, just, and stronger than any other. Then it is inevitable that I, who name myself as a knight, must be that way as well. Read. Ha! Even by his own word, a ludicrous reasoning, an illogical line of argument and claims, high-handed arbitrariness a natural subject of ridicule. However, even if Reed overtly expressed his rage upon hearing that, he simply displayed his sharp fangs and laughed, directing no disgust or disdain whatsoever. And Reed, gonna make you cry. Articulating so, Reed tossed aside the chopstick he held, and before Julius, who was gazing in wonder, took a great leap towards the rear and stood back. Subsequently, he steadily extended his hand towards the side. What his huge palm was gripping to was the stipulated sword planted into the white layer. Reed Istria, originally supposed to have merely lent his existence as the trial taker of the watchtower. By some twist of fate, he detached the arrangement of the tower through intense self-consciousness, and finally, by overriding the flesh body of the raiding sin Archbishop of Gluttony, had fulfilled even a pseudo-revival. In this condition, in this position whereby he did not need to abide by the tower's trial, only then did Reed draw out the stipulated sword for the first time, abiding by his original role. Namely, Julius, gain his forgiveness by hand of the fool who has reached the heavenly sword. Reed, that's my line you know, well, though I totally forgot about it. Julius, I thought so, thus I stated it in your stead. I challenge you. Reed, like hell I'd give you forgiveness, you dunce. Gonna make you cry ugly. Before Julius, who had his knight sword braced in his front, Reed crudely pointed the sword he had drawn out. No intervals whatsoever. Assuming a relaxed stance, having reached the extremes, the ultimate swordsman, the pinnacle of all who wielded the sword Saint Reed Istria. Julius. And now Reed, however you'd like. Julius. En garde. Placing faith in the chivalry shaping oneself, Julius Juculius tackled the sword saint with the entirety of his might. The scene changes. Both his body and heart felt light. In a non-figurative sense, that was the might of enhancement enveloping Julius as he swung the knight sword. Needless to say, the stability of mind had an immense influence in battle. Upon consideration, to state Julius had been in an insecure condition ever since he had arrived at this Pleiades watchtower ever since he had gotten his self's name plundered in the Watergate city, would be unerring. Of course, Julius admonished and restrained his own self as much as possible, forbidding it from showing on his face. Self-control anyone would appraise as akin to rationality of steel, however. It was not something that had been praised. Furthermore, forbidding the inferior form of his self from showing on his face. The consequence of having deceived his comrades and even his own self had led to the unsightly defeat of successive, consecutive losses ever since their arrival at this tower. Julius ought to have placed his trust in others, to begin with. Losing his presence of mind due to the impact of having the existence of his self forgotten, whilst merely pitying his self who had been broken off from the other person's world, he failed to notice what he should have placed faith in the utmost, were the people whom Julius cherished, whom he trusted in, whom he had pledged his loyalty to, whom he had entrusted his back to, such humans who would simply disregard Julius Juculius, who had been broken off from their world without their notice. Absolutely not, he could assert so. Hence, what Julius ought to have done had been simply one thing, Appealing with sincerity, he should have indicated his affection by his volition. The way he had done so with his buds. Julius, I should have retied the severed bonds. One who is nobody can become anybody. For nobody, but I myself, am I living witness to that. The child of a commoner who was nobody, had become even the utmost attractive and cool knight in this world. Julius, who had become nobody, was supposed to have become somebody once again. And Julius, no matter how many chances should I be given, I would surely still be charmed by the seemingly blazing young man that day, perceive ideals on the back of one who stood for the night, and challenge you, the pinnacle of the sword after all. Read. Blabberin' 'bout shit, damn cheeky of you. Upon Julius' decapitating slash, who had his determination set on the tip of his sword, Reed bellowed whilst matching in with the same sword strikes. As the entirety of his body lay subject to those sword moves and sword might, Julius straightened his yellow-hued eyes and felt wonder. Restarts included, this would be the 4th time he was battling Reed this way. The first challenge and the immediately subsequent defeat. This time, with moreover the confinement of the narrowed watchtower's entirety, and having successfully recontracted with his buds, was the 4th time. Within all of this, Reed using a weapon aside from chopsticks, though referring to chopsticks, as a weapon had exceeding room for doubt. Anyhow, him swinging something aside from chopsticks would be for the first time. And in these moments, with the pinnacle of the sword saint having wholly gripped the sword, he thought, Julius, your sword power hasn't changed, compared to the time you were using chopsticks. Reed, Li I Jus said, damn it. The reason I'm strong ain't 'cause I swing the sword. The only reason I'm strong is Jus, 'cause I'm strong. Defending against the sword strikes being casually swung down overhead, once his knees creaked, a pursuit aimed for him from directly below. Narrowly tiding over the attack he had borne witness to for the first time, Julius flew towards the rear upon the impact. Reed trailed that, not by breaking into a pursuit, but by simply taking a few long steps. Though one would grow to suspect his peculiar gait, there was nothing special about it. By merely stepping forth upon the thought of catching up with the drawn-back opponent, readily inventing and realizing a new form of gait, unlike any of its previously existing schools, was simply Reed's ability. Just as Reed himself had averred it, that was simply a matter of his norm-exceeding existence. Reed, do ya wanna cry now, Julius? No, the feeling of challenging a legend is livening up my chest. Not a bluff, Julius responded with truthfulness whilst being impelled. Yes, that was true. The one before his eyes was Reed Astrea. By his legends, simply how many times had Julius had gotten his heart throbbing, eyes twinkling, and had admired him, yearned for him. Meeting that person in reality, though he had been precisely astonished by his personality, his strength had been the very ideals he admired and yearned for. Henceforth, simply how wasteful had his self been in what he engaged in. All whilst possessing the opportunity to exchange words, exchange swords, exchange beliefs and conviction with him, Julius. Ha! Whilst crossing swords with the genuine one, Julius exhaled upon the arrival of an unforeseen thought. Exceedingly out of place, however, the anticipation made his heart throb, truly delightful and piquant. Reed. The hell ya smillin'? 'Bout, Julius. Nothing, a thought simply dawned on me. Once I fulfill my objective here and return to the service of my lord, that I shall challenge my friend, Reinhardt. Julius pronounced his idea upon Reed's inquiry. Never even once had Julius competed against Reinhardt in their sword skills, until now. On the contrary, before it was determined that they would be in differing camps in the royal election, the idea of vying with each other over anything at all had never occurred to him. The regret of never having attempted to gain an equal standing. That, too, had been one of the reasons why Julius served Anastasia and faced in the royal election. However, even had he not possessed those sentiments, Julius still would have been enchanted by Anastasia's immense talent, wished to see the same dreams as her, and stood at the same place. Thus, from the very beginning, never had he been in need of dull excuses or roundabout stances. From the very beginning, he simply should have taken 2 wooden swords and headed over to Reinhardt. Once in the past, Reinhardt and the strongest swordsman of the Valatia Empire had crossed swords. That day, When everyone in the parade ground had possessed wild enthusiasm toward the atmosphere of the sword, Julius too felt warmth in his chest. For that had been the answer. Reed. "Ha, that's a name I ain't ever heard of. Who the hell's this nobody?" "Julius. He is your descendant, and along with being the present-day sword saint, my friend." Reed. "Ka. The kid of my kid, Juice, an outsider by that point, goddamn. I ain't gonna notice him even if I see him by some roadside." Intertwining sword moves and kicking moves, Reed elucidated his irresponsibility whilst snorting his nose. Finding faint refutation in that dissertation, Julius attempted to open his mouth whilst exchanging swords. Reed. "I'm startin' to get fed up of talkin' 'bout outsiders. Do you want to have a damn chat with me?" Julius. "Though I will not deny that, I shall deny." Reed. "Julius, if only there was the time, I would have liked to exchange words with you. Let it be for 2 days or for 3 days. However, at present the time for that purpose, regrettably, does not exist. Telling me to make haste, my back is being pushed. Thus, with distance opened in between, Reed lifted his cheeks whilst viewing Julius. In Reed's blue eye was Julius' form, augmenting its luminosity. The swirling 6 colored lights intermingled, gently commencing to paint an aurora, a rainbow. And Julius, Al-Clausiria! The radiance of the emitted rainbow swept a conquering white world towards Reed. The scene changes. Julius himself widened his eyes as well upon the emitted aurora's span and might. As of now, that was maximal spirit arts, transformed to a magic of extraordinary scope, with it being treated the same as before, now inviting discourtesy. Buds know he shall not refer to those girls, who had verbatim made their occluded gift and talent bloom, as buds. Those girls, who had achieved growth capable of being perceived as sublime, with beauty, with charm, with heroism, with dignity, vividly, were not buds but maidens. To monopolize those girls entirely to himself, as all 6 of them exhibited their respective glamour, may have made him a sinner greater than the sin archbishops. However, Julius, even if you all forget me, I love you all. As though to catch up with the emitted aurora, Julius stepped ahead. The radiance of rainbow, clad in 6 elements, broke through all shields and shattered the target. Hence, before the rainbow-colored light, the options left for the opponent were merely 2 to take up the gauntlet, or to evade. Reed, ha! And in accordance with his personality, Reed Astrea shan't dodge the radiance of rainbow. Responding to the radiance of rainbow surging forward in front, Reed raised his burly arms and slashed down the sharp edge of the imperial stipulated sword he was gripping to. With no reliance on special magic or divine protections, a sword move named as pure violence in a soul swing. That was what expunged the maximal magic Julius had fired with all of his might. However, that too had been factored in by Julius as he paced ahead. Vaulting ahead from the rear of the expunged aurora, Julius borrowed the strength of his sword and his maidens. Julius, arrow, upon that instant, the red and green spirits responded to the call and unified their strength. The wind formed a whirlpool around the blazing flame, generating a tornado of incandescence at Reed's feet. Sensing the coil of the heat wave underneath, Reed nimbly escaped upwards before being scorched. However, only now did the linkage of the spirit night, of the greatest night, commence. Julius, ick. The yellow spirit yielded a protuberance on the clear floor, propelling Julius' frame further upward. Simultaneously, the glow of the blue spirit glaciated the moisture in the air, hindering Reed's ascent, who had jumped upwards. Clicking his tongue, Reed inverted his stance through an evidently beyond human deed of stomping the air, and stationed his legs onto the ceiling of ice-generated midair, scowling at Julius whilst upside down. Firm strength poured into Reed's arm, and an interception aimed for the ascending Julius, Ness. In the juncture wherein the sword saint's counterattack drew near him, the white and black spirits intermeddled with the world with their respective powers. The white light bestowed strength upon the entirety of Julius' build. The black light weakened the might of Julius' enemy, however meagerly. The paltry differentiation born in those moments was a central figure in the immediately following outcome. Reed. With the ice ceiling turned foothold shattering to fragments, Reed's hurled form blurred due to his velocity. The artless stance of the stipulated sword launched a certain type of a lengthwise and crosswise stab of the ultimate kind, sensing it not as a menace. Julius held his chest steady and confronted it. The withstanding truth was that upon the crossing of a sword slash and a sword slash, the stronger side repelled the other. Thus, Julius opened his eyes. The eyes which had continually, perpetually watched that which proceeded upwards, proceeded forwards. Julius, killing the very concept of sound and light, Reed's flash-cleaved space. He shall affirm. Should it be the stipulated sword or the chopsticks, regardless, come what may in that flash's path, it shall be slashed down. For that was the very manifestation of the notion of the sword. The sword is that which is brought forth for the purpose of slashing objects down. And sword moves was the term denoting the techniques for slashing objects down with that sword. Henceforth, the flash which slashed down all of objects in the world was the culmination and the long-cherished original desire of the sword and sword moves. Those slashed by it shan't forget the truth of having been slashed down for eternity. Thus, the scar Julius Juculius sustained beneath his left eye shall not fade away for eternity. That was the indemnification for having dodged the sword saint's flash from a distance near enough to graze past. Julius, renouncing his receiving stance, he perceived through the opponent's sword with momentary offense and defense. The slashed fundus of his eye spouted blood. However, he shall not close his eyes. Maintaining his focus on the opponent, he swung his arm. Reception renounced, he rained 100 flashes with offense. Julius, Al Clarista. The greatest ever sword strike of Julius Juculius painted the colors of a rainbow. It captured the smile of Reed Istria, ferocious like that of a shark. The eye patch concealing the left eye of the sword saint was pierced by the knight's strike as it swayed into the air. The scene changes. Julius. The instant he descended upon the clear floor with his toes, he sensed the echo of footsteps to be frightfully blaring. The moment he became conscious of that, Julius' heart, in the depths of his chest, having forgotten to beat, commenced movement in panic. Subsequently turning towards the rear, he gazed at the burly spine facing towards him. Reed, his red long hair jolting, the back stood firm and still. The great man gripped to the stipulated sword in his right hand, and his left hand was positioned at his face. The spot which that left hand was touching, therein originally was supposed to be an eye patch, but currently it was absent. The eye patch that concealed the left eye of the sword saint at present had fallen at Julius' feet. Julius. So it connected, huh? His voice quivered as he looked down upon the eye patch fallen on the clear floor and the knight's sword in his own hand. Though his whisper sought to affirm the occurred happenings, it possessed an excessive lack of connection to reality. To him, this seemed as though a transient dream, that this all would slip away and vanish through his fingers. However, through not the notion of words, the 6 lights extolled Julius' established achievement. The warm flowers named his beloved sought to fill the void born in Julius' heart, and accompanying the commend of his blooming maidens, Echidna. Julius, hearing the soft voice, Julius turned his gaze towards its direction. The great man with his spine turned towards him, the maidens transmitting commend, overlooking the battle from a locus disparate from either of them, having called to Julius was a female with light purple hair, with a face identical to that of his lord, whom he cherished, whom he pledged to dedicate his sword to, the artificial spirit who shall live for eternity, with whom he had a relationship of unknowingly mutually wounding each other. Whether the reason for her solicitude for Julius was because she cherished Anastasia, or due to the functioning of his divine protection of gathering spirits, the answer remained veiled. However, the being of someone who watched over the resolution of Julius Juculius eased his heart to such an extent, he thus hauled up his knight's sword in gratitude. Julius. Wordlessly, he hoisted his knight's sword up towards the heavens. Remnants embellished with the aurora glistened. The path of the sword verbatim delineated a rainbow. That was surely akin to blessings showered upon the knight named Julius Juculius. Reed. Had this been the shitty bloody trial, this would have made for your victory. Articulating so, the great man steadily stomped on the floor in a tangent. Once he turned around, no wound lay visible on Reed's face. What the tip of Julius' sword had reached had evidently been merely his eye patch. However, neither was even Reed shameless enough to exaggerate so and say it did not reach him. Above all, his prior remark had not been his unwillingness to admit defeat, but the truth. Had this indeed been the continuance of the trial of Pleiades Watchtower's second layer Electra? At the point of having a single blow connect successfully, Julius would have passed it and gained the right to challenge the upper stratum. However, the battle between Julius and Reed was no longer a question of the tower's trials. They were battling in order to settle this between a soul knight and a soul swordsman, a man and a man. Reed, having lost his eye patch, Reed, with both of his eyes awakened, gripped the stipulated sword with both of his hands. Clutching the sword's grip, he braced the sword with the eye at its aim. Yes, so braced the sword saint. Not for artlessly swinging sticks, but braced the sword in order to slash the enemy down with certainty. Reed, don't be complainin' even if you vanish to nothin'. Julius, even if I were to wish to complain, it would be difficult to find a way to do so when I would possess no mouth to complain from. Reed, ha, rascal, ain't even gonna laugh at jokes, goddamn. You what's your name gain? Julius lifted his eyebrows, upon being inquired for his name by the legend. Though he had assuredly named himself on countless instances before him by now, he did not possess recollection of that. However, him not having recollection of that was now insignificant, for he apprehended that with this question, Reed had indisputably, for the first time, acknowledged Julius. Julius, Julius Juculius. Since it is a name easy to forget, I request of you to remember it. Pronouncing a redundant remark he would not have perceived as humor simply a short duration ago, Julius pointed the vanguard of his knight's sword towards Reed as well. And once again, he implored for the aid of the six spirits, who had not but labored for him immediately previously. Should it be his present self and these girls, then he shall surely reach to farther heights of the rainbow's aurora. Al Clausiria and Al Clarista. Borrowing the might of the six spirits, the rainbow's aurora furling the power of the six elements. Clausiria, which fired that maximal magic, and Clarista, which made it dwell upon the knight's sword. A secret ritual further beyond, which he had not once succeeded in due to his inexperience, Julius. Hereby I vanquish. Reed, come. In that juncture, an aurora submerged the white space. The bands of rainbow tackled the great man of crimson. The original rainbow spirit arts devised by Julius Juculius, a secret amongst its secrets, neither launching the light of rainbow furling the six elements, nor making it dwell upon the sword, but cladding oneself in it, and exterminating the opponent by becoming the aurora itself. Julius, Al Clanver, that superlative strike of the spirit knight, was directly assailed upon by a clear white flash. The scene changes. From the very beginning until the very end, the transcendent dimension of offense and defense far surpassed the ability of an untrained eye to keep pace with it. Needless to speak of the colliding sword strikes, but the bewildering interchange of positions and footwork, which side was dominating and which side lay inferior, even that alone could not the pale cerulean eyes capture. That was entirely regardless of this flesh body not being her original belonging. Merely, there present were those who were vying for a matter of life and death within that dimension, and compared to them, the world she lived in simply was an exceedingly lesser dimension, that being withstanding truth. If the sense of worth and values of living beings reposed in their might as living creatures, then herself was frail, pertinent to worthlessness. Moreover, that was also the evidence of herself having lived for a time equating multiple centuries in indolence, with her back turned towards the path of enhancing, uplifting oneself. Ever since she first became cognizant of herself, she had the hunch that the purpose of the unnatural existence named herself had been fulfilled the very moment she had taken birth. If anything, taking birth itself had been her purpose, and the purpose had been fulfilled at that point of occurrence. Henceforth, left as is, she purposelessly wandered the world, unable to evade the void of multiple centuries. She did not mind even if she died. However, she merely possessed no reason to die. Thus, delaying her demise in inactivity for much too long, she indulged in sloth. And during her course of prolongation, she had happened upon the young girl. Enchanted by the way of the young girl leading a vivid way of life, her glaciated life attained warmth. The young girl who possessed a diminutive frame and spoke implausible big talk. Whom would she turn out to be? Or would she be unable to become whomsoever? She yearned to bear witness to that with her own eyes. And before one could take notice, such intrigue and interest of hers became insignificant. I don't want to lose you, or the children you cherish. She was aware that what was termed as flowing time was kind yet cruel. Though time healed wounds, it also rendered emotions obsolete. Having lived for a long, lasting period of time, she newly mused that she did not want to forfeit this to the past. Though that, too, is an impossible wish. Even if she implored for it to stop, time evanesced all without halt. Lives, bound to possess minuscule and feeble lifetimes, displayed all kinds of changes within their time. Just as the nameless knight, who had his name plundered, who remained in the memories of no one, proved that he was a singular human named Julius Juculius. The knight, clad in the radiance of rainbow, plunged directly into the white light. Against Julius, who gambled upon and unveiled the secret ritual, Reed Estria's actions were terribly simple. To swing down the sword he had swung up, a deed of sword strikes likely repeated the most in this world it obliquely bisected the world, becoming a light which wrecked all in its path to ruin. Neither a special magic nor a special move. With a mere swing of the sword, the world was scorched with the light, unintelligible, whether Reed Estria exceeded norms or if all sword saints were such. Though what was certain was, Julius, that she wished to devote her strength, such that the aurora would not be outpushed by the absurd white light. That was indubitably her genuine motive, however, an act like directly interfering into that battle, prior to being suicidal, would be uncouth, and that sin would not bequeath her even the right to complain should even her soul be shattered in repentance. And the young girl Echidna was aware that herself could not do anything. In this place, if there was anything she could do for Julius Juculius, who had transformed into the aurora, her hand on her slim chest, she sensed the existence slumbering in its depths. The original possessor of this flesh body, the reason why she would not awaken from her deep slumber, in its search Echidna had arrived at this tower of the sand sea. However, that had been deceit. Echidna was already aware of the reason why she would not wake up. The girl, who declaimed her greed, who boasted her desire to attain all kinds of everything, never letting go of what she had once put in purse come what may, since she utmost loathed having to let go, having to part ways with anything. There was only one sole reason which she could reckon. Having ceded the body over to me, and temporarily lying dormant in your odd, you are in a state wherein you won't receive any interference from the outside world, because the odd is a certain kind of Eigen world, and by her own volition she had secluded herself away in that place, the reason being obvious. Should she come outside, she would incur the effects. The abhorrent authority of the sin archbishop of gluttony, she would incur its effects. She would forget what she wished to never forget, relinquish what she wished to never relinquish. Anastasia Hoshin would forget Julius Juculius. So was her purpose. However, it seems everybody who came to this tower are all staunch boneheads. All of them appear to be uncute to the point of dying dwelling over losing something. In this duration of nearly 2 months, she had attempted to imitate her way by herself, but now was the right time. Besides, since she had observed his positives and negatives, his flurrying self as a nameless knight from close vicinity, even if that girl was to forget, she could apprise her. Ah, is that so? Wielding no purpose, the artificial spirit who had fulfilled its duty upon the point of taking birth. Though she had judged she wielded solely that unpleasant duty, contrary to expectations, that was not where it came to an end. The young girl she cherished, the knight she cherished, and acting as the intermediating bridge between the chipped two. Was that onus not a task of vital significance? Was that not of such vital significance that she could smile musing this had been the purpose of her birth? Thus, Echidna, to not even see your knight be at his coolest, a deed so wasteful, is it not unbecoming of your miserly self? The scene changes. The white light hunted the aurora down as though to paint it out. Furthermore, he pressed, with the entirety of his soul, and having borrowed the might of the 6 spirits he had reforged his contract with. He had gambled upon and unveiled a secret amongst secrets, whilst the opponent had merely swung the sword earnestly, solemnly. Indeed, he was utterly astounded by that absurd exceeding of norms. Simultaneously, since he also possessed the emotions enunciating this is how it must be overflowing within his chest, he found his own self to be irredeemable as well. With a swing of the sword, the world fissured. That was the special move of the sword saint which transpired when Reinhardt swung the sword as well. Suddenly, in the midst of a rivalry between a life and a life, Julius contemplated. Reinhardt and Reed, should they battle each other, simply who would prevail as more powerful. A legend and a legend, a sword saint and a sword saint in the unattainable battle who would be declared victorious. Unfortunately, the opportunity to make certain of that shan't pay a call. Julius. Then I have no choice but to confirm it with this body of mine. The opportunity to exchange swords with Reinhardt van Istria with all Reed Istria befell only upon ones who reached this tower. Moreover, the possibility existed solely for Julius and the young girl named Emilia, who had headed towards the upper stratum. He bore no intention to concede that duty to anyone else. Thus, what remained for him was to simply triumph, to jostle this white light and slay Reed Istria with the radiance of rainbow. For that purpose, the entirety of his soul and his sword power, requiring a single step further, should a scintilla of pride and might dwell upon the tip of the greatest knight's sword, Echidna. Julius, a call improbable to reach. Within impact, rendering the passage of time indistinct. However, the time necessary for each convergence of swords was less than a fraction of a second. This was the offense and defense of this momentary world. In that space, much less, in the midst of a battle being fought at the risk of life and death, nobody's voice could possibly reach Julius. However, the voice certainly swinged Julius. Perhaps not his eardrums, but it instead had reached something far deeper within, the innermost depths of his chest. Given he had resolved in his heart to wear the shell-named knight, he must respond to it without fail. That is why, hearing the voice he could not possibly have heard, Julius turned towards the one whom could not possibly have viewed, and exchanged gazes with those pale cerulean eyes. The luminescence dwelling in those large, spherical eyes had distinctly changed from what it had been just before. "Go get him, my knight." In that singular sentence dwelled the one final push of sword power he required. Julius, Aya, Kua Arrow Ik in Ness. Requesting for one final push, he called to the spirits with whom he had become a part of the aurora with. In order to surmount the white light, beyond which present was the form of the enemy he ought to defeat, directly before him. In order to make the tip of the sword reach beyond the white light, Julius, Hick. Opening his mouth to an extent unbefitting of him, he raised his voice to the extent of vomiting blood. With an expression possessing the preparedness to die, discarding elegance into the wind, merely ensuring the bones supporting his self did not fracture, with his paramount dedication towards it, Julius stepped forth. Reed. And receiving the rainbow's aurora intensifying its brilliance, the ambushing white light too escalated its vigor. Furthermore, strengthening their might, the radiance of rainbow and the white light collided vehemently, Julius. That which seemed as though it would subsist for eternity was met by an unforeseen fall of curtains. The scene changes. Julius. Dumbfounded, Julius noticed the feeble voice spill from his throat. The mutual clash of their maximal powers, its abrupt fall of curtains. However, without halting its vigor, his sword, embellished with the aurora, had directly stabbed through the opponent's vitals. Julius. Why? Reed. Shit, if this ain't a Borin and Din. Julius plunged into turmoil, being the one to be blamed for the stab, whilst on the other hand Reed, who had been stabbed, remained calm. Heedless of the stab in his chest, he did not even express a frown. Was that a deed of his tenacious force of will? And if not so, was the anomaly which transpired on the flesh body of that great man the cause? Disparate from the penetration of Julius' sword, a wound, no, a crevice had been yielded in the chest of Reed Istria, and that was not confined to merely his chest. His arms and legs, neck and cheeks, throughout profuse sections of his body stretched wounds akin to cracked glass. Intuitively, Julius comprehended what it was. originally inconceivable distortion stood corrected. This was a phenomenon of that mechanism. Read, ultimately, it's 'bout that. The human named me ain't fittin' in any vessel other than myself. Whilst gazing at the palm of his fishering self, the insight Reed grumbled was correct. Captured due to the authority of gluttony, in the form of pillaging the right of control over that flesh body, Reed Istria had acquired substance, however. The truth that until the bitter end, this body belonged to the sin archbishop of gluttony, Roy Alfred, who had become the foundation, shan't change. In other words, the receptacle named Roy Alfred was unable to endure the workings of the norm-exceeding soul named Reed Istria. Its failure materialized in the final phase of the battle against Julius. Julius. Then, I'd much rather if you might as well. Reed, well, if I didn't get eaten by this guy, I may have punctually gone at it till the end. In that case, it would have ended at the point you felled the eye patch after all, you know. Julius. KH? Reed. Kahaha. Everything ain't gonna go the way you want for weak folks. Do you want to cry now? Tossing the stipulated sword aside, Reed mean-spiritedly laughed whilst revealing his teeth. How come could he laugh that way? As is, his disappearance now was a future set in stone. Instead, had he defeated Julius, he may have possibly been able to once again walk his lifeline which had terminated once, even though he had let that possibility slip through his hands. Reed, are you a fool, you? Something like livin' once gain, who the hell's gonna do something that troublesome? First of all, the hell's gonna happen if I run into me somewhere, Julius. I'm sorry to say, but you have already passed away due to old age multiple centuries ago. Even if your present self were to walk around, for your former self that would be. Reed. Then are you worshipin' the mug of my kid's kid who's like an outsider or something? Bullshit. Treating his own descendants as outsiders, his recent remark seemed to be his true sentiments. Appearing to earnestly not possess any interest in a second lifeline, Reed crackled the bones of his neck. Reed, first of all, the hell are you tellin' me to do after comin' back to life, hey you? Like playin' round with the fiercely frizzlin' who passed by earlier, though the hottie over there's pretty nice too. Then there's also that woman with an erotic look. Julius. Oh, so do you truly possess no lingering attachment? Reed. Nah, damn it. Doin' what I want to do when I think I want to do it's my style. You too would have it much easier should you do that. Julius. My gratitude for the advice. However, that would instead be much more of a thorny path for me. His self chose to willingly wear the shell. Deceiving himself, or acting as though a part of his foundation was a separate article, would also be apt labels. Having realized that choice was befitting of his self, that it aligned with his wishes, even if Julius perceived Reed's extravagance to be dazzling, he shan't opt for it. Hearing that response of Julius, Reed snorted his nose in annoyance. Subsequently, the wound on his chest, the crevices born as a result of transcending bounds, the solitary wound differing from those, he touched with his fingers, Reed. You don'tcha misunderstand, Kay. Your sword reachin' was a fluke. Had this been my body, something like you wouldn't even be left able to rub snot onto others. Julius. I would not do such a thing in the first place, though. Reed. How borin'. Spitting out, Reed knocked Julius' shoulder with the hand he had touched his chest with. Whilst stiffening his body upon that impact, Julius took in a deep inhale. Not yet had he accepted or reacted to everything. However, he deemed letting these moments free by merely losing his presence of mind upon the occurrences before his eyes and experiencing turmoil to be far more unendurable. The crevices dilated, the end was already visible. Hence, Julius hoisted his own night sword he had unsheathed before his visage. Julius. From the bottom of my heart, I revere your sword power. Reed. I ain't needin' a bastard's admiration. I take my leave with my victory, Julius. Julius. With his name vocalized in his final pronouncements, Julius gazed in wonder. However, as per the resolve in his heart to not be flustered, he concealed that astonishment behind a smile and bowed. Just as he had confidently named himself, before this legendary being, as the utmost finest knight. Just as the ideals of Julius Juculius were molded to not bring shame to his admiration. Julius. Yes, until the very end. It is your victory, Reed Istria. Reed. Now that's a nice face, damn dejected loser. With those words marking the end, the crevices of Redistria dilated, the scene changes. Stranger. Unlike their visual impression, the crevices which dilated until the very end were not accompanied by sound. Unlike the shattering of glass, the great man of red hair was extirpated like diminishing light in his stead. Collapsed onto the clear floor was a young boy of a petite build, with distended cold eyes. One who ate the memories and names of others and handled them per his will, bizarre eating and a blasphemer. The sin archbishop of gluttony, Roy Alfred, had collapsed, scuppered. Roy, indistinct whether he was alive or dead, gluttony, remained immobile with not a single twitch. However, identical to Reed, he merely had the deep gash on the left side of his chest, its fatality incontestable. Ascertaining merely so with his eyes, Julius lowered the knight sword he had hoisted as a demonstration of honor, sheathing it into the scabbard he wielded, and turned backward. The aurora unfettered. In Julius' environs were 6 spirits with augmented brilliance. Without the strength of these girls, who had bloomed into maidens from buds, the one to be lying on the clear floor this way surely would have been his self, rather than the opponent. For that, he must convey his gratitude and appreciation conscientiously. However, with apologies to those girls, he must defer that demonstration of gratitude. Steadily, Julius advanced. Ahead in the direction he was headed, intently watching Julius was a gorgeous, slender, petite female with pale cerulean eyes. Undulating light purple hair, the personage adorned with a white outfit unfitting for the sand dunes. By her feet was a white fox, with the pupils of its eyes wavering in suspense. The form of her, who had always been miming as a scarf, the significance of its presence there. Once again letting himself be aware of that, Julius closed his eyes. And Julius, pleased to meet you. The statement he had conveyed to the Sword Saint as a challenger heretofore, he expressed once again. But the sensation deep within his chest in these moments differed from the enhancement preceding battling. However, there also existed something which remained the same. As though the opening of a new page in a tale of adventure, the adventurous heart of a youth yearning for the night. Stranger, I am. Kneeling at that spot, Julius articulated the first words and the other person responded. His stance remaining lowered, Julius awaited the upcoming words. He reckoned he could wait for however long a duration. What felicity this was, to have faith that should he wait, he would assuredly hear her words. Anastasia. I am Anastasia Hoshin. Julius. Anastasia. I want everything in this world. So great and cool Oni-san, what's your name? With elegance, she smiled, and he could perceive exactly how she must have tilted her head afterwards. Remaining knelt down and his face lowered and concealed, saying, Ha, Julius took a short inhale, and Julius. I am Julius Juculius, your one and only knight. Anastasia. Julius, you may have forgotten. However, I am one who has devoted the sword to you, one who dedicates the entirety of his strength for you and aids your will. A respectful bow with the knight sword placed on the floor, forby, Julius at last raised his countenance. Before him, no matter what gaze should his lord have, he shan't regret. It is unbefitting of a knight to lose his presence of mind, be confounded, face downward. For the very existence who put up appearances the utmost and sought to possess a cool and charming air was whom Julius admired and yearned for. And looking down upon that Julius, the young girl narrowed her spherical eyes, Anastasia. Really, I don't remember though, but Julius. Anastasia. At the first glance I thought that I gotta make this Oni-san mine. At such proximity were the blazing, sparkling eyes of his eternally craving lord, revealing the intent to not relinquish anything and everything. To the greed seeking to obtain everything, Julius Juculius devoted his sword once again. A sublime play, like the tale of a lord and knight in fiction, the restoration of the plundered bond of lord and retainer was realized in the second layer of Electra. That was the accomplishment of eliminating one of the 5 obstacles set forth by Natsuki Subaru. Great library play odds, the second trial hereby concludes.